The Powers Project.
Hi, Margaret. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing real good. Thank you, Kurt.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, you're up there at Buffalo, New York. So, as we talked about a little earlier, you're looking forward to watching the Bills play here tomorrow night.
Oh, definitely. I can't wait. It's a long time coming.
Yes, it is. I remember when the Bills actually went to the Super Bowl and lost because I lost money on them. so,
Yeah, you will always remember that.
yes, I'll always remember that. You always remember when you lose money. so, hopefully, they'll have a different turnout this time around. So,
Definitely.
good luck with that.
Thank you.
So you're here today. Tell the listeners and the viewers a little bit about yourself and what it is that you're here to talk about today.
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science from the University of Buffalo and as well a Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry. I was a former chaplain and now I am a Eucharistic minister at my home parish. Okay. And basically, I am part of what the Catholic Church calls the laity. In other words, the everyday member that would be sitting out in the pews of the church. And I found through reading various books, biblical research on this topic regarding woman priest early history. And for any Catholic or as well other Christians, if they're familiar with the Catholic Church, this, to the hierarchy anyway, isn't even an issue. We've been told since the time we were little, there are no woman priests. There never were woman priests. So obviously, when I started reading books that had done biblical research into the specific topic, I was very curious. And the one book in particular, John Wingard's The Ordination of Women in the Catholic Church, he has a separate chapter on Mary Priest. And I'll tell you, when I read that, Kurt, I put the book down. I was so excited, but then I had to pick it right back up because I had to look at those words. With what those words was I actually seeing what I was seeing? Because it is incredibly unbelievable to, in my case, I'm a single Catholic woman, but since the 1950s, I have been told there never were woman priests in our church. So beyond having woman priest, you have the most important woman priest of all, Mary, Mother of God. Jesus's mother was called Mary Priest, and she had a title. She was the model for all priesthood in the Catholic Church.
Where did John get this information that Mary was a priest? It's not in the Bible. So where did he find this information?
I have like all the I have his own book, but I had like all my endnotes and whatever for the research. You know, the various quotes I did. I know he did go over to India and he did research there. Okay. But I mean, this man, John Wingard, he is a former Catholic priest himself. And all the biblical information I'm referring to, it comes either from Catholic priests, Catholic religious sisters, and as well from Protestant ministers. You have Gary Macy, The Hidden History of Woman Priest. And he basically, in so many words, encapsulated it, that this history is basically the way that, I mean, it was undermined. It was just basically buried. And if anyone brought any credence to it, it was thought to definitely be delusion. It's just marginalized woman's actual history in the Catholic Church. And it's very hard as a woman. When I first heard this information, obviously I was so excited, but then it hit me. I've personally been lied to by my own church. And that's just something that's very hard to ever begin to swallow, to really take in. So, of course, then what are you going to do? Are you going to stay in this frame of mind where you do? I mean, I was angry, upset. I mean, I was going from different emotions. Um, how is it going to affect my faith life? In other words, it'd be like a crisis of faith. And I personally, I just have to distinguish between the Jesus that I know and love. And obviously, these other men that are representing Jesus are not mirroring him in the way of his personal ministry. But I could just leave and get up and leave the Catholic Church. But to myself, that's not going to solve this issue. This is an issue that so many average, everyday Catholics have never heard about. If I wouldn't have read that book, I would as well be in the dark too. So you can just imagine, I'm just very few Catholics, hundreds that know this, but I mean, out of the millions of Catholics, whether it's here right in the US or even go across to Europe, go across into Ireland or Australia. How many Catholics in every single diocese worldwide, they don't know this information and they don't realize it's even an issue. And when you think of it, that is really sad.
So I want to pose a couple questions to you. It's as one who is a non-believer, I guess you might call me. I wouldn't go that far, but I'm one of those people like I need to see some proof other than just faith. However, I don't totally, dismiss the fact that there may be something out there, but let's just go with a non-believer. So if I look at this from a perspective of while you say these are men that were chosen by God to run his church. So doesn't the responsibility lay on God that he chose these men, that these men are being dishonest, and these are the men that he chose?
Yes, he chose them, but as well, he also gave them free will. And that free will basically has gone haywire. It's gone completely upside down. And it's gone to the worst morals when you look at the other subject in the Catholic Church of priest sexual abuse. Because these men obviously don't belong to be in the Catholic Church or any other church if they're going to be raping, young Catholic children, young adults. But again, it's that free will.
But that free will, all right, so here's the thing. So throughout the history of the Bible, anytime that someone disobeyed God's command, there is always retribution for it. And yet there doesn't seem to be any retribution for these men who are ignoring God's commands now. If anything, it seems as though, as what you just spoke about with the abuse by the priest, this is actually getting swept under the rug as much as possible. And, because of the extent of it, it hasn't been completely silenced because it's too broad for it to be completely silenced. But there doesn't seem to be any real retribution for these acts that have happened over the decades or longer.
Yes, with this in particular, again, getting back to the priest sexual abuse issue, we have something in the Catholic Church that used to be in existence, and it was a phrase, and it was called pray and obey. And like I grew up in the 50s in the Catholic Church, and I knew that I dare not ask my pastor any questions. I mean, seriously, who was I? Did I have some type of religious training? You wouldn't ask your pastor, and of course, you wouldn't inquire about what Rome was doing. So I'm not using it as an excuse because it's awful, but basically, it led into this mentality that you were never questioning anyone in authority in the Catholic Church. So obviously, if you're in a parish situation and, an adult parent, the closest to the hierarchy would be the bishop in your city. Well, if you're never asking them anything, I mean, this was just wonderful for these offending not only the priest, but of course the pastor as well is just as culpable, or a cardinal, because they were the very enablers of such awful behavior. But they had basically free reign, because back then there wasn't anything called like a parish council, where you would have like meetings with people that would be like elected within the community, and the pastor would be there, talking about issues that didn't even exist like back in the 50s and the 60s.
Well, I think that's been the church's stance throughout the centuries, is that, you know, in fact, they worked diligently to keep scriptures from people, because they didn't want them reading. They didn't want them thinking for themselves and what the scriptures meant. They didn't want them interpreting the scriptures. They wanted to interpret it for them and tell them what the scriptures meant. So the church has a long history of pray and obey, if you will.
But
And
I mean, I think it's really affected, unfortunately, the laity, because where is the laity out in throngs of people actually picketing their like local bishop? Here in Buffalo, there were so many times it would be just myself and another man, and maybe there would be a crowd if there was 4 or 5 individuals, and we would basically be outside the church or the Catholic building, and people would come up to us. What are you doing? The nerve of you questioning the hierarchy of the church. They could not see that this hierarchy, I mean, should be held accountable. And a lot of the older people, let's face it, health wise, you can't blame them. They can't come out. But then there's so many other people that I think it's easier for them to, like, say, in a state of denial, because they don't want to get involved, because then that means personally, I'm just surmising, that they would have to experience that betrayal of trust. Come to that realization that their church isn't all that it should be.
don't they know? I mean, honestly, again, as someone who's not a member of the church, I can't help but think that they sit back and have to know that the church isn't all that it can be. They have to know that on some level, and ignore that, because if they look into it and they see the atrocities that the church has committed over again over the centuries, I know I'm not quite sure how you can come to terms with that and ignore these atrocities and excuse them for their behavior, and all the things that have been done in the name of God, and be okay with that, and still go, I believe in the Catholic Church. There's
I think, unfortunately, whether it's in the Catholic Church or any other denomination, there's a group of individuals that will figure they are requiring, meeting their duty, whether it's going, weekly to mass, to church on the weekend, or whatever. They're fulfilling that. So, in some sense, they're taking care of their religious requirement, and I think that is also would be prevalent in the Catholic denomination.
No, I think you're right. I think it's probably in most, at least Christian religions. I think that they settle and go up. As long as I go to church and do what I'm supposed to do, you know, I can check this box and I'm good to go. I
Right.
I think that when you do see things that are happening, no matter what church you belong to, that is wrong, and you don't stand up to it, I think I don't think you can just check that box. I think you're going to be held accountable for not, having called them out. So the fact that you've said, look, I've done the research, and the research is out there, and that women have held the priesthood, and you are ignoring that fact, and you're keeping it from us for whatever reason. So let's get back on. I want to get back on that topic here for a bit, since that's what your book "Scandal in the Shadows" is about. It's about the fact that throughout history, women have held the priesthood and have been and ordained as bishops and priests and other positions. Um, that's what your claim is, and the Catholic Church seems to be ignoring it. So, I guess when you first discovered this, did you go to your pastor? Did you go to him and say, "Hey, look, I wanted to show you what I found. Can you explain this? Can you tell me why is it that the Catholic Church ignores this?"
No, I didn't. And that's awful because I knew I was going to get a line. And again, here it probably sounded very sarcastic, but if you're a priest, except there are the open-minded priests that you, like I had a former pastor, oh, he was just wonderful, Father Stan. And I could have done exactly what you said. But then since that time, other pastors have assumed that, responsibility, and they're not that open-minded. So, I mean, I can very well, my assessment, I'm usually pretty good on that, reading that. So I thought, why do I need to go and then even feel worse? You know what I mean?
So, do you not think if you brought this to his attention, I guess if it were me, this is the way I look at it. If it were me, I'd go to the pastor and I go, "Look, I need to show you something. This is what the church is teaching, but this is not what the truth is. And if this is God's church, God's church should always be teaching the truth. So I want to present this to you so that we can correct this wrong." Are you afraid of retribution? Are you afraid of being excommunicated? Are you afraid of?
Oh, no, no, I'm not afraid at all. I just know what the Catholic line, like the hierarchy and then down to the priest, is. This is what we're saying. Don't rock the boat. And I just feel I would get further by openly presenting this, like on a talk medium like this, to get more people involved. And I really feel the whole crux is until the average everyday Catholics everywhere know about this awful lie, that there is the truth of Mary Mother being a woman priest. There were other women priests in all various types of ministerial roles. You have to get them with you. You have to get, just as money talks, you have to get large numbers of Catholics. I'm not talking hundreds, thousands, I mean big numbers before the hierarchy will even consider this issue of women priests. Right now, this is unreal, Kurt. Back in 2010, our former Pope Francis, he was a cardinal. He had a book out called On Heaven and Earth. And he basically said that the women feminists achieved their goals when women received the right to vote. Well, I'm looking back into the 1920s, and you mean from that time until today, we're all set. We've achieved everything. But seriously, take it out of the public context, move it back into the Catholic Church hierarchy, and you have a pope that's made that statement. The issue of any woman's equality today, 2021, in the Catholic Church, is not even on the Catholic Church's hierarchy's radar. And that just says volumes.
All right. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that the church hierarchy is aware of this whole thing about women priests or priesthood holders, but they're ignoring it, and they're going to continue to ignore it. You say until you have numbers that force them to take a look at a better look at this and do something about it. Is that correct?
Yes, they are literally in the driver's seat.
So
They do not have the press beating down on them. They don't have anyone asking them questions because they have come out through the centuries. This is just like the sexual abuse scandal. This is a scandal because it involves a centuries old scandal of lies and cover up. So, what do I mean by cover up? The Pope has his own commission. It's called the Pontifical Biblical Commission. And only back in 1976, which is fairly recent for us, they did a study regarding specifically about women being priests in the church. The Pope's own commission back then came out and they explicitly said there is no reason why women, scripturally, there's no reason why women can't be priests in the church. So what have they done? They have sat on that information since 1976, and here we are in 2021. Now, I call this very deliberate and very, very calculating. And from the 76 through today, even our Pope Francis is saying, we have to start a new theology for women. No, we don't have to start a new theology. That theology was proven by this 1976 commission. Okay, go back 2 years to 1974. There was an International Theological Commission, and this time they were looking at the study of women deacons in the early church. And boy, they came out with these 3 Greek rituals, and they were basically all in agreement that no matter if it was a man or a woman, they were both on the altar. They were in the presence of a bishop who laid hands on them while officiating over them in prayer. They would put like a stole around each of their necks. They each received the chalice to drink from. Now, come on, what more do you want? Yes, they were called women deaconesses. Okay, so that's 1974. So my question is, why in 2016 did Pope Francis basically have to convene a same type of a commission to look into this question? And it's basically gone nowhere. And then look even biblically into like Galatians 3:28, there is no man or woman, all are one in Christ Jesus, or Genesis 1:27, in the divine image, God created woman and man, God made them.
okay, well let's stop there for just a second. So let's go back and again, let me play devil's advocate if I may.
Okay.
And let's take this from the church's standpoint. So I think it's commonly accepted with biblical scholars and theologians that it's, at least for them, that Eve wasn't the first wife of Adam. It was Lilith. And Lilith was made of dust, as was Adam. And because of that, Lilith felt like that Adam had no dominance over her, even though he was trying to exert it. And so because she wouldn't bow down to Adam, Lilith left, and God sent some angels to retrieve her, and she refused to basically bow down. So God made Eve from man's rib so that he could have dominance over her. Now, from the church's point of view, you could see how they go, look, woman was put on this earth for men and for men to rule over. I find it strange, though, that the animals of the world were made from dust as well, and not from Adam's rib, but yet he still has dominance over them as well. So the point is that Lilith was cast out. She actually left, but she was, there's a whole story behind that, which I don't want to get into deeply. But basically that she refused to obey Adam. So God made, because if you go into Genesis chapter 2, and I forget what verse it is, but it talks about Eve being made and taken from the rib. even though it says in Genesis 1:28, it talks about man and woman being made from
Mhm.
dust. And so therein lies that problem is that Adam didn't have dominance over Lilith, so he made Eve so that he could have dominance over her. And then we have the scriptures, which I know there's a couple of them. I know you make mention of 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. I'll paraphrase it, and it says something to the effect that I suffereth not that a woman should usurp authority over man, but should be in silence. And that's just paraphrasing. And that women don't have the power nor the right to teach man. So in those respects, and yes, that comes from Paul, in those respects, the church could say that you don't have the right to have the priesthood to be able to practice these things over men. What do you have to say to those things?
Well, that's one of the points. The second one that you were just talking about. It's interesting, that women shouldn't be allowed to teach in the church. And the latest biblical research has come out. There were 5 specific biblical points saying why women couldn't explicitly, be a priest, woman priest. And the second one was the point you were talking about, teaching. And they've come to the conclusion that all of these 5 points are based on cultural prejudice. And with regards to the one about women not being allowed to be out in the public and teaching, they said that there was a common law back then. And it was believed because of women's instability and feeble mindedness that they should not ever allowed to be out in the public teaching. And this particular condition was more prevalent with women than men. And then even getting back to the image, how could a woman ever be made in the image of God? Because men at that time did have dominion over women and, saw them unfortunately as nothing. This one as well, they said was cultural prejudice. And then we get to Eve. And of course, it was all Eve's fault. But no, seriously, if you go back into Genesis, this is just purely, it's prejudice. And they said at the time in the church, there were perfect candidates for the priesthood, because obviously, if women were carrying this punishment of Eve, they were carrying sin. So they wouldn't be the best stellar candidates at that time anyway for the priesthood. But the perfect members of the church that could fill that position were the men. And then we've all heard how Jesus explicitly picked the 12 apostles to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, if you look into the culture of Israel at that time, it was really patristic in nature. And Jesus, he knew that would never fly to put 12 women in there, when there were these views against women. So again, that's they said that was cultural prejudice. And the last one as well, that Jesus was a man. So you have to have a man, someone that was like made in the image of God, has to be up there during the consecration, the Eucharistic celebration. But all of these points that the church keeps saying were biblically founded now have been proven to all have cultural prejudice behind them. So my question is, why hasn't the Catholic Church made some type of an announcement that, well, look, we were wrong on this. These are not, in fact, biblical in nature. This comes from cultural prejudice.
But
The Catholic Church there has never brought this out.
isn't the Bible as a whole? There's cultural prejudice throughout the entire Bible. Obviously, the laws and the rules that were made and how they were made were all cultural prejudice, and 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 unfortunately for you, in the Catholic Church, that cultural prejudice is still prevalent in many areas of the world. So you were talking about that, you need to make this known to millions of Catholics. Well, you spoke about Ireland, and you didn't even bring up South America, which because if you want to talk about a male dominant region of the world, South America, you're going to have a really hard time getting that accepted down there.
My
And
work's cut out for me.
right, exactly. So, you did talk about uh, you talked about this Article 29 that comes from what is it? The
Vatican
documents of
II, the
Vatican II.
church in the modern world, or it's called Gaudium et Spes.
Okay,
And
what is this exactly? These documents of the Vatican II. What is this?
Vatican II had various constitutions that they called them, and it was like the Constitution on the liturgy, the Constitution on the laity, and it was that one that what they wanted to do, basically, this Article 29, it was to eliminate any discrimination in the church, whether it be sexual, whether it be racial. And that obviously was never addressed, because this is discrimination against the woman in the Catholic Church. It still exists. It was never addressed. So you have all these avenues, whether it's through this council. Vatican II was meant to, Pope John the 23rd said he wanted to open the windows of the Catholic Church. And he really did, because at this council, he invited at the time, which would have just been unheard of, members from all different faith denominations. I mean, how refreshing. So he was really ahead of his time, and unfortunately, he died from cancer. Because then you had the other popes that took over, and there was so much of Vatican II that just never took off. And as well, I really blame the Catholic Church for not having, you can call it PR, but I mean, just even presenting it to the laity in the church. There was so much confusion back then, because before Vatican II, the church was being said in Latin. And that's all that the Catholics at that time really knew. And all of a sudden, you had this new Vatican II comes in, and whoa, we're going to take the Latin out. The Mass is going to be said in English. The priest now is facing you. I mean, there's nothing to matter. I think it's even better, because obviously, if you didn't know Latin, I mean, you can relate, you can, know the English, obviously. But to me, it was more personable. And they even looked at that, and they found that the Mass that we have today as Catholics is really the closest as to what it was for the first Christians in the Catholic Church, which I think is really special. But beyond that, they never told the regular Catholic laity that before the Mass was said in Latin, it was said in Greek. It was said in Aramaic or whatever. You know what I mean? There were different languages, and over the time, things did change. And that's the same way with the communion cup. There was a time where the cup was taken away, the cup was brought back, or even receiving. Like in the 50s, you received it, you received it on your tongue, then it went to the hands. But there are changes, but I really feel bad, because there's a church that I know of, and these Catholics, unfortunately, they were so upset by Vatican II that they saw this Pope John the 23rd as like some type of a heretic. And they started their own church, in the sense that they would only believe up to Pius XII, who was the Pope before John the 23rd. And to me, it's like a time warp, because they wear like the same vestments they did, back in the 50s. And there's nothing wrong with having a procession around the block, but who are you missing? You're not seeing altar girls. That's missing. there wouldn't be, when they have communion, there won't be any woman up on their altar. So I just feel they've missed out, on so much. And where is this ecumenical spirit? I mean, if you've unfortunately closed yourself off
Well,
to change of any type.
let me read from this Article 29 that you speak of from the documents of the Vatican II. It says, nevertheless, with respect to the fundamental rights of the person, every type of discrimination on sex, race, color, social condition, language, or religion is to be overcome and eradicated as contrary to God's intent. So what you're saying is that according to this Article 29, all of this is supposed to be eradicated. All of this discrimination is supposed to be taken away, correct?
Yes, and they never began that, any part of that.
So even and I know this is going to probably sound controversial to you, but I read that and I hear not only of sex, race, color, creed, social condition, that gay people could also hold the priesthood. Gay people would also be able to administer because there's supposed to be zero discrimination according to this. And it's supposed all of that discrimination is supposed to be eradicated. Would that be correct?
Definitely. And there's nothing the matter with having gay people in the Catholic Church. But again, you have the bishops.
I know some Catholics who might disagree with that.
But I mean, you have the bishops that are going, nothing changes. I guess you look at that issue in the context of the Jesus that you know.
So, all right. So let me ask you this. Stepping aside from the story I told you about Lilith and showing that, where the Bible shows that Eve was made so Adam could have dominance over her. Stepping aside besides that and saying that we were created in the image of God, both male and female were, from dust, and that they should be equal. You realize that you're in this institution that has a patriarchal, head, and that it's always been that way, and that you're fighting an uphill battle with these men who refuse to give up power, who don't want to give up power, and yet you still want to be part of this institution that discriminates against you, discriminates against women. And I guess the thing I find the hardest for you is that you have so many women in the Catholic Church who are okay with that. I think that's your biggest battle, because I think
yes, that is. I have battles on my on many fronts, but seriously, that's why I'm staying in the church, because I love my Catholic faith. I love Jesus. And I really feel that so many of I call them so-called priests, are not in any way narrowing Jesus's own ministry. That has to be changed. And then, as you said, with the woman, until they themselves really understand the truth. And it's almost like there's a lockbox. And when someone tries to present the truth, well, no, there can't be woman priests, because the hierarchy has told us that there never were women priests. Until that lock is broken, that they will even momentarily consider, of what I'm saying, of actual biblical research, nothing will ever change. So I'm basically in the infancy stages, if you will, of presenting the truth.
I think, again, I sympathize for you, because I can see.
Thank you.
I mean, honestly, the struggles that you have ahead of you, because it's not, and this isn't just the Catholic Church, this is Christianity as a whole. We've whitewashed Christianity. When you look at pictures of Mary or you look at pictures of Jesus, these are not Middle Eastern people, these are white people, and we've whitewashed them. And the fact that you can't get the Catholics, the Mormons, the Baptists, I don't care who they are, they have this image of a white Jesus, a white Mary, white apostles, and you can't get them past that, let alone to sit there and say women can hold the priesthood. I just don't.
Yes, it's really, there has to be like, I'm sorry, there has to be like woman priest 101. But getting back, it's very interesting what you said about the pictures. There was Sister Elizabeth, and forgive me, I can't remember her last name, but she really went into that. And she said how you see like the paintings, like back in the 16th, 17th century, and you had a Mary like with blue eyes and blonde hair. And she said, of course, Mary, Mother of God, would have been had Semitic features, darker colored skin, hair, eyes. And what I like with this whole view of Mary, I mean, obviously seeing her like she was an everyday woman. She had to go out and lug the water. She had to do the hard, physical chores of, let's face it, back then, just preparing a meal was a whole day activity. And I think it's so important if women can see Mary as that everyday person, you can relate closer to her. Because for myself personally, there was always like a division. This Mary is up like on this pedestal and she's so perfect. And she is perfect, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Now in history, she was really, truly an everyday woman. And she was out on the same roads as Jesus had traversed or the other apostles had traversed. And that we've missed all those stories because the lectionary of woman basically in the Catholic Church has been hidden. And this is a whole other issue. Like, you said, how about, getting through the woman, getting that initial breakage. But then even beyond that, you have to have instruction because women have never heard the stories about Leda, Cael, Maria. These were early woman priests, let alone woman bishops, woman deacons. And they're strangers. They're complete strangers. So again, I think even initially when women first hear this, if they are receptive to this, well, okay, that was something. Mary was a woman priest, and yes, we had other women priests, bishops, but how does that really speak to me? How does that relate, in my own little world? What importance is that going to mean? And one of the big things when there's any discussion towards woman priest or woman's ordination, the Catholic Church subtly will throw in the word feminism, like it's something bad,
Right.
to like take the focus off of the main issue. And as well, they'll add the word power. And I really want Pope Francis or anyone else listening that woman's religious heritage was literally taken away from them by the early church fathers. And they were really creative in the way they did it. They made this man-made law, which is called canon law. And of course, that was not in existence in Jesus's time. But they made this caveat when they were deciding how are we once and for all going to take women out of their religious roles. And they said that women could no longer be up on the altar. Well, wasn't that marvelous? It was marvelous for them, but literally it just totally erased a woman from ever holding those positions again. And there again, for the average everyday woman, who was our model? Well, yes, we had Mary Magdalene and Mary, but of course, Mary wasn't a priest then. boys from the age they've been little, they obviously see all the priests up on the altar. Oh, gee, my uncle Sean was a priest, or um, Uncle Christopher was a bishop. Uncle Ryan was a cardinal. But what about for a woman? Where is our religious heritage? It's totally been lost. And I think this would just be so wonderful. It would really bring a new life, a new breath into the religious experience for any young woman in the Catholic Church. And of all times, it would be the beginning to start in some way to fill this awful priest shortage void.
But you realize by doing that, the church, that the church, just like the church has certain books that they've not released that probably should be part of the Bible because for whatever reason that whatever they might say, they don't want
Yes, tell the truth of women.
right, exactly. Because then once you have the power to hold the priesthood, then you're no longer subservient. Now you're no longer beneath man, and you're equal. And in the church throughout history has shown that that's not, they don't want that. In fact, the Christian religion as a whole, I would say, doesn't want that. Everything that the Bible teaches is that women are supposed to be subservient to their men. And not being a woman, I still don't understand how in the world you can buy into that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Especially when that the things that we're taught about women being not as smart. I mean, even in Muhammad talked about that and talked about how women were dishonest and how you needed two women for one man because they couldn't be trusted. All these religious leaders talk down about women, and we know today, especially when it comes to intelligence, that women are just as intelligent as men. We've had research and studies that have been done. We've had IQ tests that have been done to show women are just as smart as men. So all this nonsense that was being propagated over the years, talking about how women weren't equal to men is complete nonsense. And it was for no other reason than to keep women in the role of being a subservient to their men.
Definitely.
How can you belong to such an institution without going, I just, to me, I would just go, I'm out of here. You guys are lost.
Well, this, as I say, if it wasn't for my love of God and the faith, but again, there has to be definite changes. But I'm just one that if I feel something has to be changed, I'm going to stay there, and I don't care. I'm like a pioneer woman.
You like the Reformation with Luther, and just go, hey, look, what you guys are doing is wrong. I'm going to take the truth, and I'm going to go and do something with the truth, and take God's word and what he means, and work with that, because you guys you're not teaching God's word.
Well, I'm very lucky that it's not the time of Joan of Arc, or I would be there, unfortunately, under the fire. But there is an organization called Roman Catholic Woman Priest. And people are probably saying, what's she talking about? Roman Catholic Woman Priest? And yes, there are today Roman Catholic Women Priests and Roman Catholic Women Bishops. Back in 2002 on the Danube River. Now, this had to be done in secrecy because there was a bishop who ordained Catholic women to become women priests, and as well Catholic women to become women bishops. But it had to be all done, sadly, in secrecy, because if he was ever found out, he would just immediately be thrown out of the Catholic Church. So here in the United States and across the world, there are Catholic women that are priests and that are bishops. And unfortunately, towards the Buffalo area, they haven't come our way. I can't wait, but a call out. But seriously, it gives you some sense of what the Catholic Church could be in the future, having woman priests. And I remember when I was picketing for woman priests, this one lady came up to me and she says, like whispering, "Oh, I don't think we can have Catholic woman priests. How I just couldn't go to a Catholic woman, a priest for confession." So then I assured her, of course, there'd probably be a Catholic priest, a man priest around. But I mean, it just gets, and some of the stuff is just off the wall. But there, I guess I would like to start a discussion going back from the latest research that I mentioned back in 76, that the Catholic Church found no scriptural reason why women can't be priests. So why don't we operate just from that specific fact?
Well, they found 5 reasons, but you say those are all cultural prejudice, and that and that those don't count, because one of the things you refer to Mr. Macy's book, Gary Macy's book, quite often. And one of the things I found that the Catholic Church, because I want to know how did they dismiss Mr. Macy's findings, and what they were saying is that what the definition of ordination was back then compared to what it is today was not the same. So they're trying to dismiss it and say women were ordained, but ordained didn't mean the same thing back then. Which
back then, I think it was more personable. It would be like you're just a local community,
right?
And you would like elect someone to be a priest. So that person, there was the celebration because they were moving on to priesthood, but it was due to the community voting for them. And they even mentioned if a bishop ever had tried to have any say in that, then it would make that ordination null and void. They specifically had to be picked by that community. But then when you had the canon law came in, it took away completely just a particular community picking a candidate. And now it was to this special, like a priesthood. And there was like this power that the priests never had before. Well, I mean, obviously they could consecrate the Eucharist, but now there was the so special that it was just a separate power, extra power to be able to consecrate the Eucharist. And things from that time, I think, really, unfortunately, it's like any big organization, you get away from like the more intimate, the smaller the things are, and then they take on like a life of them all, the bigger organization. And in fact, back then in the 5th century, it was the local community did all this. And as I said, the bishop had no say in that. And people don't even realize today, with churches being closed left and right, the bishop, there is a canon law, and they specifically can pick either a layperson or a deacon to run a parish if there is a shortage of priests. So you even had, like, in this sense, something very beneficial in law that would help, but you get the hierarchy, these bishops, and it's like they don't want, they just don't want to share any power. I mean, it's awful. And whether that be in the context of a lay person, obviously, if it was a lay woman, probably that would put the kibosh on it. But I mean, seriously, it is sad.
I understand the necessity for the priesthood. I understand that is the keys to God's church. I understand in that setting why the priesthood is so important to Catholics. And well, from my study, there's only 2 churches who claim to have a direct lineage to the priesthood back to Jesus Christ: the Catholics and the Mormons. Those are the only 2 churches. And so, because the Bible does stipulate later on after Christ was crucified that the priesthood was indeed still necessary. To me, they are the only two churches that have any standing. I have my problems with them in other areas, but they're the only two churches who claim to have a direct lineage of their priesthood back to Christ's time. So they're the only two who hold the keys or claim to hold the keys. The biggest problem I guess I have with the priesthood is if you have a mother with a sick child and she's praying to God to heal her son, does God withhold his blessings from that child until there's a priesthood holder who can give that child a blessing? Does God bless that child more because now there's a priest who holds the priesthood who gives that child a blessing? Is that more important than the mother who's praying to God to ask to heal her child? Is that really a necessity?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, if the person is of, such faith that, obviously like myself, I'm not a priest, but I really believe in God and I'm imploring God at this, specific moment in time to help me to heal that child. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah,
And
I
and
don't know if I I guess
that's one of the big problems with Catholic religious sisters. If they're a chaplain and they're in a hospital, and I mean, let's face it, if someone is about to die, minutes are of a necessity, and they can't get a hold of a priest. I'm sorry, but this is just totally asinine that they themselves can't give the last rites to that individual.
right.
I
I,
mean, where is the common sense of Jesus? I mean, it's sorely missing. And this is one of the key, moments that it is. Because if you have someone of a particular faith and they want to be, anointed at the end, they receive the last rites. And then, I'm sorry, Father Joe isn't here. This is his day off or whatever. I mean, it's total insanity.
so I guess my last question to you will be this, because I assure you there are people out there the Catholic faith who are saying this. They're going to say, Margaret, if you don't like the way the Catholic Church is run, why don't you get out? Why don't you go join another church? Why don't you go, you know, believe in one of those liberal churches that, they'll let anybody hold the priesthood or claim to hold the priesthood and do whatever they want to do? Why don't you leave the Catholic Church alone?
That's excellent. I am not trying to start some new thing by having women priests. I really would like them to consider the past early history, which the church hierarchy has not told you about. And that was the history of women bishops, priests, deacons, teachers. And of course, Mary Mother was the most famous of all priests. It's not bringing back or starting something new. This is what I want them to understand. This is something that has been taken away from you. Anyone that's, sitting out there, they themselves at some point, if they wanted to become a woman priest, that was robbed from them. And I'm just basically trying to bring back a tradition that was within our church. And I want my Catholic priest, and as well, I would hope you would want your Catholic priest in every sense of the way to mirror Jesus's own ministry of love, of inclusion, and beyond all of unquestionable truth.
I will say this: every show that I have, we approach these challenges that we face, and
Mhm.
before the end of the show, I like to, and whenever we can, to find a solution for these challenges. And so I see the challenge being that you have the hierarchy who's not willing to listen to you, and you're saying that the only way we can get them to listen to us is to reach millions of Catholics out there. I still see an issue with it because a lot of those are going to be men. So here's my suggestion for a solution. You need to go directly to the women to and let them know, look, this has been deliberately we've been deliberately told a lie to keep women down, and that's exactly what this is about. and go to the women, because I'm going to tell you, as Catholic women, if you were to band together, you would change it overnight. If all the women got together and said, "Oh, we're not going to deal with this anymore," I promise you, the Pope on down would sit there and go, "We need to do something, and we need to do something now." And I hope, for your sake, I hope you're able to do that. I hope you're able to reach, at the very least, the women of the Catholic Church. Get your message out to them and let them know that what they've been taught is not true, and that it goes against their own religion. It goes against God's word, according to the church itself, and that you're able to get that message to them, and that you're able to implement the change that you're looking for.
Oh, and if I could just say, I do have a petition in my website, yourradicaltruth.com. And if you feel it's unwrong, that it was wrongful that Mary, Mother of God's title was taken away from her, that women today should have equality in the church, and that we should definitely not be still lied to. You don't have to be Catholic, any Christian, any man out there that has children, has a sister, and feels, gee, I think that they're being treated disrespectfully. If you could just sign that petition, because those numbers eventually, between all my shows, they will, the petition being signed will go to Rome.
We'll make sure that we add a link to this show at the bottom here, so people can link on, find your link and connect there and sign your petition for you. In the meantime, I want to let them know about your book, Scandal in the Shadows: The Original Priest, Mother Mary. Especially if you're Catholic, because I read the book, I found it very interesting. I did find that it was that you were writing to people, you're writing it as if people were Catholic, and so I thought that was, which I wasn't. But I mean, it's an easy read. But especially if you're a Catholic, this is a book that I think that you could gain a quite a bit of knowledge from, and learn the truth about the church, and where women really, where their position really should be in the church instead of where it's at. So I applaud you for writing the book and taking the time and getting your message out there for all those women out there who don't know any better.
Thank you very much, Kurt. I appreciate the time.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Well, thank you again for being on the show. And folks, thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care, be safe, and wear your mask.